Good evening to those in the UK and good morning to those in the US and to Canada. It's great to see so many faces of our supporters around the world. Actually, not faces, but to see the registrations, to see the numbers rising for our webinar tonight. Coming from the UK, from the US, Israel, and further afield. So welcome and thank you for joining us. And a very special webinar on the topic of Israeli public opinion. We have over 600 people registered for this webinar, and I just wanted to take a moment for those of you who don't know us at the NIF UK. I'm Atiara Winchester. I'm the Director of Content and Leadership at our team here. I want to start by thanking you all for coming. I know that these past 20 months since October the 7th have brought with them many challenges for all of us, and that many of us feel disillusioned and anguished when we talk about the issue. This call is intended to give us all a chance to try and understand what the Israeli public is thinking. The question has been top of mind for me, for my colleagues, but also for our broader community, and indeed, to no small extent, to the world. It's usually difficult to understand what Israelis are thinking or feeling. As many of you have been there know, things tend to feel or appear radically different when you're in Israel as to when you're abroad. And this is much more the case now, with a prolonged war and no end on the horizon, state of ongoing emergency and political deadlock. Also, it's important to remember that Israel is a country of almost 10 million people, and there is no definitive answer as to what Israelis are thinking, what they believe in, and what they want. Israeli society is very varied, and there are ranges of opinions. However, we do believe that it's important to look at the trends, and in so doing, observe the changes and try to understand what the statistics tell us about society. And that's the reason why NIF supports the research of aChord, whose CEO, Ron Gerlitz, will speak to us shortly. At a time when Israeli society is deeply fractured and political uncertainty runs high, understanding where the Israeli public is has never been more important. aChord, social psychology for social change, bridges divides by identifying narratives, perceptions, emotional drivers that shape Israeli public opinion. Studies for aChord, it's important to say, are not just here for analysis. They're tools that help us advance liberal democratic values and help to promote an end of our current situation and the dead end of the war. We hope to take the opportunity to learn, to listen, to try and understand what Israelis are thinking right now, the challenges and opportunities they and we face, and what this tells us both about the present and critically the future of Israel. Ron Gerlitz, a little bio. Joined aChord in October 2019. Under his leadership, aChord has expanded its scope of activity, formed new and sustainable partnerships, and deepened the impact of the implementation of socio-psychological knowledge in the field. Before joining aChord, Ron served for more than 10 years as the co-executive director of Sikori Afuk, another NIF grantee, a Jewish Arab organization advancing equality and shared society between Jews and Arabs in Israel. In this position, Ron led Sikori's team to advance significant policy changes in the Israeli government towards its Arab citizens. Ron is a Hebrew University of Jerusalem graduate with a BSc in Maths and Computer Science and an MA in Public Policy. He began his professional career in high tech, working for 6 years as a software and algorithm team leader in Israel and in Silicon Valley in California. A moment of housekeeping before I pass on to Ron. Ron will talk for 30 minutes and then we'll have plenty of time for questions, at least 20-25 minutes. And I'm asking you to write those in the Q&A box at the bottom. The chat will be disabled, but the Q&A box is open. And if you can hold those questions just until Ron finishes his presentation, that will allow us to filter and navigate the Q&A more effectively. Ron, the stage is yours. Thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Thanks, Atira, and thanks News World Fund UK for inviting me, and I'm very happy for the opportunity. I want to open with something which is important for me to say in the beginning. and to mention that we are now in the most violent days of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Israeli hostages are still in Gaza for more than 600 days. Innocent Palestinians are being killed in Gaza in numbers that we have never seen during Israeli wars. The humanitarian situation and the suffering and the starvation in Gaza is nothing less than catastrophic. And before presenting the data and analysis, I want to say that I think that the most important thing now is to stop the war and to bring the hostages home. And these are both things that are coming together. And I think that all Israel lovers and Ohavei Israel in Israel and all over the world should do whatever they can to stop the war. And I think it's really relevant for each one of us. So I'm the Executive Director of aChord, Social Psychology for Social Change. In the context of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, we bring theories and data in social psychology in order to develop messages and tools and help players in the field that work to increase support for ending the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. We believe that facing such an hard challenge of changing public opinion about the conflict, and for sure during the time when the conflict is so violent, using intuition is a bad choice. And we offer using data and research and science in order to develop messages that can be effective in changing people's mindset. We work vis-a-vis politicians, civil society organizations, opinion shapers, the media, and others. Our work on the ground is possible also because of New Israel NIF support, which is a significant support for aChord, and it is a good opportunity for me to thank NIF, an NIF supporter, for supporting aChord and other players that work to bring an end to the conflict. Since October 7th, we conducted almost 30 research among the Israeli public. aChord is not a research organization. We are using research in order to develop tools and intervention and messages that can be effective, as I said before, in changing people's mindset. We collected thousands of data. Don't be worried. I'm not going to present you thousands, not even hundreds of data items. I'm going to present you really a short set of data, and mainly to present you analyze and perspective based on this data, which can show you the current Israeli public opinion and the potential in the Israeli public opinion to take Israel to continue the very negative trend Israel is now in, but also to a political change that will take Israel out of the situation and the nightmare that we are now in Israel. I'll share with you data and analysis about public opinion about the government, the conflict, and ending the war. Okay, I'll now load my presentation. Just let me know that you see it well, Tira. Tira, do you see it well, the presentation? Okay. So I'll begin by saying, I'll begin by mentioning data about public opinion towards the government. So I'll begin by showing you this graph and mention that Netanyahu government lost support among the Israeli public. See those results. 72% of the Israeli public think that Netanyahu should resign, 50% think that he should resign now, and 20% think that he should resign when the war ends. But look at the lower bar. The lower bar is the Likud party voters. The Likud party is the party of Netanyahu. And among them, 45% think that Netanyahu should resign, 15% think he should resign now, and 30% think that he should resign when the war ends. Now, in addition to that, polls in Israel see constantly, since October 7th, that the current coalition parties do not succeed to reach more than 50 mandates in the poll. The Israeli parliament is composed from 120 seats. The current government parties are 68 seats from those 120. It's like a strong majority inside the Israeli parliament. And in all polls of the TV channels and other research in Israel, the current government coalition parties do not succeed to reach more than 50%. It means that they lost significant power among the Israeli public. And it means that the chance of Netanyahu to lead the next government is low, and this is of course good news for anyone that cares about Israel. But of course, Netanyahu and the Likud, they also see this data. I think they are doing like a daily research, I assume, on their side. They see the data about their chances to win the election, and they see the data about what their voters themselves think about the fact that Netanyahu should resign when the war ends. Look at the lower bar. 30% of the Likud voters think that Netanyahu should resign when the war ends, and this is probably another reason that Netanyahu doesn't end the war, and this is of course very bad news for the Israeli society. I want to move forward and mention to you that in 5 main topics that are now on the Israeli agenda, the majority is against the line of the government. Here you can see few data, and some data I will mention that is not in the slide. So as I said before, 72% believe that Netanyahu should resign. 82% of the Israeli public, or among those that have an opinion, think that Israel should return all the hostages and end the war, which is what the Israeli government is doing in these days. And look at the lower statement, I'll come to it later in my presentation, but 58% from those that have an opinion think that at this time the war serves primarily political and personal interest rather than security objective. We've never seen in the history of Israel that during the war there is such a majority among the public that think that the war doesn't serve security objective. But this is not the end of the picture, because I want to mention now the 5 main topics in which the majority is against the government. So the majority is for ending the war and bringing the hostages. This is number 1. Number 2, the majority is against the continuation of the judicial overhaul, and the Israeli government now in a strong act to fire the Attorney General. The majority of the public, is for National Investigation Committee. The majority of the public is for drafting the Haredim, the ultra-Orthodox, and the majority of the public is for making the election earlier and not as planned in October 2026. And we speak about something like between 60 and 70% of the Israeli public on all those topics are against the line of the government. Again, Netanyahu knows it. And usually Netanyahu, his ears were very open to the public opinion. Netanyahu took care through his career as prime minister to take into account public opinion, and now it seems that he lost it. Now, he lost it in many aspects, but also in the aspect of paying attention to public opinion, and it looks like he's running forward with his government that include, of course, very extreme ministers. And we have never had in the history of Israel a government that was so ignorant of public opinion and include such an extreme ministers. In that perspective, we are in a very dangerous point of time in Israel. I want now to relate to the public opinion related to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. And I want to begin by mentioning that public opinion in Israel related to the conflict is more complex than what we tend to think. It is not optimistic, but include opportunities that many of us tend to miss. And I want to open with the bottom line. The most effective way, and there is an effective way, to convince the Israeli public to support the two-state solution is through the framing of a regional diplomatic security agreement that include the Palestinian state. Already now, more than half of the Israeli public, 54%, support it, and a big majority of the Israeli liberal democratic camp. And this is our biggest opportunity. And now I want to open from the beginning. And before presenting the data, I want to say that processes that in other places in the world, following what happened in October 7th, when a society was brutally attacked by the other side. I know that the conflict didn't begin on October 7th, but the Israeli society was attacked in a massacre on October 7th. Usually, it was a process that in the first year, like the side that felt that it was attacked, and again, Israel was really attacked on October 7th, just wanted maybe to kill all the others in the other side, to revenge, and all those bad perceptions that people usually have in the first year after such an attack. And usually after years, a more pragmatic point of view arose. They're trying to find a way to live with the people on the other side. In Israel, both things happen almost together since few months after October 7th. And what happened is that the Jewish public in Israel went, since October 7th until today, more right-wing, more anti-peace, and more anti-Palestinian. But at the same time, in the same public, or this big fraction of the same public, is also a pragmatic views about the conflict. We tend to see very much the first process that I described, and we tend to miss the other. And the other is our biggest opportunity to end the conflict and save Israel. And I want to describe you the both direction, the negative side of the public opinion in Israel, and the side that is more pragmatic and has the potential to take us to a better place. I'll begin with the negative side. I'm telling you up front, the data that you are going to see in the next minutes is a very difficult data that testify about very bad things in the Israeli society. So I'll begin with, we'll do it like step by step. We see, and by the way, in each slide you can see in the lowest part of the slide the date the research was conducted. This is from last year, but the most of the data you are going to see was collected 2 weeks ago, in the end of May 2025, just 2 weeks ago. So Israel has a very bad and negative perception towards the Palestinian, anger, fear, humiliation, hate. I mean, all those very bad emotions were on a very high level following October 7th. This is not a surprise following October 7th. People see the Palestinian as, I mean, of course I'm generalized, the majority of the Jewish public see the Palestinian in a homogeneous way. They don't believe that there can be peace between us and the Palestinian in the short and the long term. Look at this result. We ask people if they feel hope or despair regarding the chances that in the near future, there will be a political agreement that will include an end of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Only 13% of the Israeli public, to some extent, are hopeful. Okay, if you look also only of those that are very hopeful, you speak about 2% of the Israeli public. The Israeli public doesn't believe, okay, and is very hopeless about the chance of ending the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. The data here, I think, is very clear. There is also a strong process and situation of dehumanization of the Palestinian in general, and in particular the Palestinian in Gaza. When we ask people after Trump ideas about Gaza, what they think about Trump idea of resettle the people in Gaza, we found those results. Look at that. 80% of the Jewish in Israel support, when we ask them about Trump's proposal to resettle Gaza resident in other countries in a scenario where the migration would be voluntary. I'm putting aside the question if it's legal, if something can be voluntary, but when we ask people 80% support, and when we ask people if they support, transfer by force, like a forced expulsion of the Palestinian in Gaza, we see that 60% of the Jews in Israel support this idea of transfer to the Palestinian in Gaza. Those are of course very difficult results, and this is not the end. I promise that the end will be soon with the bad news. And I want to show you something which is very sensitive, but it is important for us to, in aChord, to show you the full picture, and of course to show it also in Israel. We ask Israelis to what extent they think they agree with the statement that there are no innocent people in Gaza. Look at those numbers. Those numbers are very hard. And if you look on the lower bar among the Jewish people, and only on the two most right-wing results, this 43% and 20%. So together, okay, it means that 63% of the Jews in Israel either totally agree or almost totally agree with the statement that there are no innocent people in Gaza. I can tell you almost on a personal level that when I saw the result, I really hoped that there was a serious problem in the research team in aChord, and we checked it time and time again, and those are the results. And of course, we can think, what does it mean? The majority of a society think that there are no innocent people in the other side, not include kids, baby, etc. Now, as much as those results are very bad, I do want to say, and it is no way an effort to try to justify it, but just to say that this is what you expect when you look about a society which is post-traumatic, that was attacked in a massacre, and see itself still under attack and under a threat to its existence of the society. This is what you get when a society feels like that. But of course,
I was going to ask you just briefly, do we have any comparative statistics as to before October the 7th in terms of the way people see people's innocence or lack of innocence in Gaza, or transfer, forcible?
I don't have the exact number of this, but we have comparative data about the negative emotion towards the Palestinians, and of course they increased significantly after October 7th. And again, it is not a surprise. Now, I try to say that it's kind of natural, this response, as much as it is a very bad sign of what happened in the Israeli society. But I want to say that the leadership in Israel, of course, has a big role on affecting the Israeli public, and we are now with a very extreme leadership. And I want to say something that I have no way to say it in a soft way. In Israel, there is legitimation and normalization of discourse that called for genocide in the Palestinian from among ministers in the government and the ruling party, the Likud. Member of Knesset, Nissim Vaturi, Deputy Speaker of the Knesset from the Likud, said a few weeks ago that Israel should partition women and kids from men in Gaza and kill all the men in Gaza. An explicit call to genocide. Netanyahu said nothing about that. Smotrich, our finance ministry, time and time again called for a total destruction of the cities in Gaza, destruction, annihilation, but in Hebrew he used the word ashmada. And anyone that knows Hebrew knows that what the word ashmada, what historic context it brings for Jews that hear the word ashmada. For those that don't know Hebrew, I'll say that in Hebrew concentration camp are machanot ashmada, and Smotrich probably by intention used this word to say what he thinks that Israel should do to cities in Gaza. And of course, that such a statement from political leaders in the ruling party and in the government create a norm of dehumanization of the Palestinian in the Israeli society and in the Israeli army. And if you want to see the result, you can see what happens and what the IDF does in Gaza. I'll end here now with the bad news, and I know it was a lot. And I want to say that at the very same time, there is also a positive, or at least more pragmatic trend among the Israeli society, and I want to present it. So among the Israeli public, there is a broad understanding that military force alone is not enough to ensure security of Israel. Look at this result. We ask people what effort should Israel invest in order to achieve its security. They could choose either military operation or diplomatic efforts or the combination of both. And look at the upper bar, 71% of the Israeli public think that the security of Israel, some are very optimistic, on the right side think that it can be only diplomatic efforts, but the majority of the Israelis think that Israel's security can be ensured only by the combination of a military force and diplomatic efforts. Now, when we ask people, what kind of diplomatic solution can be achieved to the conflict, so if we ask Israelis directly, do they support a two-state solution? Do they support establishment of Palestinian state? The answer will be no. There is a very low support for when you ask people directly about two-state solution or establishment of a Palestinian state. For people, it looks like to give a prize for those that attack us. Now, the data that you see now is and if you remember one thing from my presentation, so please, I want to ask that you remember this data. We ask people to what extent they think that Israel should agree to a political security agreement as part of a regional framework led by the US that include the establishment of a Palestinian state in return for Arab state recognition of Israel and normalization agreement with it. And we see, and this data is from 2 weeks ago, but it's very stable in the recent year, that more than 50% of the Israeli public support it, 54% of the Israeli public. It also includes 47% of Jews in Israel, almost 50%, almost half of the Jews in Israel support this framework that included the regional framework that include establishment of a Palestinian state. And look at the lower bar. Among the opposition parties, okay, in the liberal democratic camp, we speak almost about consensus. Almost 80% of the liberal democratic camp and the opposition parties voters support this regional framework that include a Palestinian state. And make no mistake, we don't speak here only about leftists. There are not enough leftists in Israel to fill those numbers. We speak deeply into the center and even into the moderate right in Israel. Otherwise, there is no way we would get these numbers. And those numbers are, I mean, it's not only aChord, also other organizations that do research get it in the recent months and weeks.
Ron, I want to ask you, how much do these set of statistics and these percentages kind of contradict, to your mind, the answers that were in the previous slides?
So I'm exactly trying to explain, and coming to the point where I try to explain how those two things can be together. And is it a contradiction or not? And it's not contradiction, and I'll try to explain. The Israeli public looks for security. After October 7th, people are looking for security. And there is a collapse in Israel of the perception that the right wing can ensure Israel's security. Till October 7th, generally was like a partition of responsibility. The right wing is responsible for security, and the left is responsible for values. This collapsed in October 7th, since the most right-wing government in Israel brought to the biggest murder of Jews since the end of the Holocaust. And this collapse, also the concept of management the conflict, which was a strong concept in the Israeli public, also collapsed in October 7th. And the Israeli public is looking for pragmatic solution that will ensure its security. It sees that the war is continuing in an endless way. And then we see the data that on the one hand, people support transfer, and the other hand, they support this regional framework. It means that when there is a concrete thing on the table, that people see as something is concrete, that they think that it can ensure their security, there is a majority that support it. Either it's a very bad and awful idea, like transfer of people in Gaza, or this regional framework, okay, that includes establishment of a Palestinian state. And the most important, I think, explanation to what you have just asked, Atira, is that we understand that bad relation, hate, and dehumanization, and even support for very extreme ideas doesn't mean there isn't support for a political diplomatic agreement. Those things can happen together. You can hate your neighbor. You can wish that someone will come and you pick your neighbor by force with his apartment and throw him to some other place. But when you wake up in the morning, the neighbor is still there. And you might agree to an agreement, probably with a very high fence between you and your neighbor, because you know that he stays there and you stay here and you want to continue to live in the same neighborhood. And this is the explanation that we see for those what can see as a conflicting trend in the Israeli public. I think we have
it's an emotional response and a pragmatic response. The emotion, you know, what we're seeing in the previous slides is a gut feeling, and here it's a pragmatic reality.
I think it is, but also on the pragmatic, it's also very emotional. People are looking for security, and one of the things that are attractive in this framework that now you see on the screen is that, you know, people understand that Israel by itself didn't succeed to ensure the security, and there they get something very strong. They get like a regional framework that will ensure their security, and also recognition in Israel. I mean, those are like big profits that come with this framework. I want now to share with you some data about, and this is like close to the end of presenting data, about what Israel think about. I spoke before about the conflict, and now really about the war in Gaza. So you can see here, almost 70% of the Israeli public support the deal of return all the hostages and ending the war. Even among the coalition parties, there is many more people that support ending the war, 47%, compared to 30% that are opposed ending the war. And again, the opposition is like a consensus that support ending the war. It means there is a clear majority in Israel for the deal of returning all the hostages and bring the war to an end. We went one step further, and we asked the public in Israel, do they agree with the claim that at this time the war primarily served political and personal interests rather than security goals? And we found, generally in the Israeli public, 50% agree with those statements, only 36% disagree with this statement. And I want to pay your attention to the opposition, voters of the opposition. 80% of opposition voters in Israel, which is now the majority in Israel, as I said before, think that at this time the war serves political and personal interests rather than security goals. Those are people that are sending their kids, okay, to serve in Gaza. Some of them are being killed, and also to kill a lot of innocent people in Gaza. Think about the psychological situation of those people in Israel that are so much against the war, and the war continues, and they have to send their kids to fight in this war. And what does it mean, this data about the war? The Israeli public wants to end the war in Gaza, is not interested and connected to the goals of the government, which include occupation and Israeli control in Gaza. The government doesn't care and continue the war, which is the longest war in Israeli history, that has the biggest arm of civilians. And so far, I think I'll take the presentation off and I'll stop, continue to speak without the presentation. Just 1 minute. Just 1 minute, I'll continue. Okay, so it means that the government, continues the war, continues the suffering of the hostages, the killing of the civilians, in numbers that we have never seen before, in a war that the majority of the Israeli public is against and think that it serves political and personal interests. So far, the objection of the public to the war is not being translated to a large-scale struggle against the war, and doesn't succeed to stop the war. Our goal in Israel is to continue and increase pressure on the Israeli government to end the war. In aChord, we are doing serious efforts to understand what can cause a process in which this majority that is against the war will go to the street and demand ending the war. Some people are in the streets demanding ending the war, but it is far from reflecting the big majority that is against the war and think the war should end. And of course, there are other organizations in Israel. Many of them are being supported by the NIF that are struggling to end the war in Gaza. We try to do whatever we can, so far, without success. The hostages are suffering, the soldiers are being killed, and the humanitarian and the starvation in Gaza is in a level that we have never seen before, and scores of innocent people are being killed in Gaza on a daily basis. It means that we need also pressure from outside. And I want to repeat and say that I think that anyone that cares about Israel and loves Israel, and also, of course, governments around the world, should put pressure on the Israeli government, include strong pressure to end the war. This is a very clear interest of us in Israel. I want to conclude by saying the following. There is a liberal democratic camp in Israel. It is a camp that was created when the judicial overhaul began in January 2023. according to all polls, this camp is going to lead the next government in Israel. The research that aChord did since October 7th doesn't leave any proof very clearly. The majority of this camp is for ending the war, of course, in a deal that will bring all the hostages, and support this regional diplomatic security agreement that includes a Palestinian state. And all this before there is a serious public and leadership discourse that pushes to this direction of this regional framework. It means that based on our research and also research of others, I can say also in these very days, there is still an opportunity to take Israel to a better future. If we succeed to create public and political discourse that support political diplomatic agreement to end the conflict, and if the leadership of the liberal democratic camp will raise this flag, which is not the situation so far, with the exception of Yair Golan, there is an opportunity to significantly increase the support in this agreement to win the next election, which will be based on what people think about the conflict, and to bring that the next government will promote this regional diplomatic security agreement, and even that include the establishment of a Palestinian state. I think that creating this process in the Israeli society is our most important goal to save Israel and also to save the both nations from continuing killing each other. I'll end by that.
Ron, thank you so much. And in a moment, we're going to go into some of the questions that are coming in thick and fast in our Q&A box. Just before that, I wanted to ask you, in terms of that kind of conflict between the opposition of the war and sending their own children into Gaza, what are the social, psychological ramifications as a society for that kind of conflict of interest, both now, in the medium term and in the long term? I mean, beyond calling for elections, beyond coming and demanding a change in government, just in terms of the fabric of society, what happens in that reality?
You know, I can tell from, it's like, you know, really ask me, you know, about my friends and people that I work with. No, I have no easy way to say it. People are getting crazy about, you know, it's always hard to have, you know, kids that are fighting and are like in danger of their life. You know, people really don't sleep at night when their kids are fighting in Gaza. It's always hard, but now when so many people are against this war and think that the war doesn't serve security interest, the situation is very, very hard to bear. Very, very hard to bear for parents. Very, very for parents and for people, you know, around their circles. My son is 18 years old. He's going to go to the Israeli army in a year from now. Okay, I mean, it's very hard to think for me how I'm going to cope with it. Okay, with the fact and you want to be a kravim, you know, to be like a fighter, etc.
Yeah, combat units.
It's create a psychological situation, like a great conflict between you and the state. For the parents that are so much against the war, and you know, the war is longer than the independence war. I mean, it's very clear that there is an option to end the war, and you know, and all the serious columnists in Israel say that, you know, that Netanyahu time and time reject this opportunity. And there is another thing that we didn't speak about is what happened to the Israeli society when it understand what it did in Gaza. Because so far, the Israeli society doesn't understand, for many reasons, one of them, that we simply doesn't see it in the Israeli media.
Yeah. Thank you, Ron. And we're going to get into a kind of nuts and bolts question, really about methodology. And we have a question here just about qualitative and quantitative research techniques, sampling methodology and representation across all Israeli adults. And then we had a question a little bit earlier as well about demographics, whether you can talk to a little bit about how you take these surveys, who it represents in that number, and over to you.
I'll say very shortly that we are using a polling companies that that are very professional in find a representative sample of the Israeli public that include Jews and Arab citizens of Israel, and among the Jews, secular and religious and ultra-Orthodox. It is a representative sample, and we also compare the result of our research to result of other organizations that do research, and the results are I mean, I think that we are doing things that are much deeper. I'm not very objective about what we think, but that's what I think. But the results are quite similar. So we are quite confident that what we see is what we see in the research really represent public opinion in Israel. I mean, this is our expertise, to make sure that the sample is representative. I'll take the opportunity to say that, now I just show you a data about what the public think in Israel. But aChord's biggest expertise is not to understand, what people think, is to understand what can change public perception. Our research goes deep, and again, this is research that is a unit that is being funded by the New Israel Fund to understand what can change people's perception, and we use this understanding in working with change agent and give them tools and messages that are effective in changing public opinion.
Okay, thank you. I also have a question, just in terms of gathering information about the split between the Mizrahi and Ashkenazi response rates to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict.
So the biggest split that we see in Israel related to conflict is between secular, religious, and ultra-Orthodox. And unfortunately, and it's very consistent in the polls in Israel, as much as you're more religious, you are more against the Palestinian, more against resolution of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, more against rights of the Arab citizens of Israel. I mean, those are very bad results. We don't want it. If you're religious, you're against all those values, but unfortunately, this is the situation in Israel. And I can say that among the Mizrahim, there is more high percentage that are either Masortiim or religious, so there is a correlation, or at least to some extent, between Ashkenazim and Mizrahim and their stand related to the conflict. I mean, we know among the weight of the Mizrahim among the government voters is much higher than the rate among the opposition voters.
Okay, and we also have a question about any counterpart polls of the Palestinian population, either in the West Bank or even in Gaza. What information is coming from there?
Okay, so I'm not an expert on the polls in Gaza. Dr. Khalil Shkaki is doing constant polls in Gaza. We do see that, I can say maybe two pieces of information. The support in Gaza for the Hamas decreased significantly since October 7th, And we also see a correlation between Palestinians that think that in October 7th, the Hamas attack was intended only through Israeli soldiers, which we know it's not the case. Just, people believe in this fake news that the Hamas, by intention, killed only Israeli soldiers, and it was like when the Israeli army came to rescue the citizens, the Israeli army killed the Israeli civilians, which of course it's a lie, it's a fake news, but we see a correlation between people that believe in this fake news and those that support October 7th attack. There is a much lower support among those Palestinians that know the truth, that the Hamas killed by intention Israeli citizens, include kids, on October 7th. It means, by the way, that currently, in both sides, there is a support for political resolution of the conflict, on both sides. But on both sides, we have a leadership, okay? On both sides, the Palestinian leadership in Gaza and the Israeli leadership in Jerusalem is against those resolution of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict.
Yeah. Questions coming in about Naftali Bennett. If Bennett were to be the next prime minister, how would that affect Israel's return to liberal democratic values, considering that he himself is religious and comes from the settlement movement?
Well, Bennett is a big story in Israel. and by the way, if we speak here in a context that is related also to philanthropy, there is also a big excitement in the liberal philanthropy that is investing in Israel, a big excitement from Bennett, which I think it's a very bad direction. You know, Bennett is a right wing. It's not something that I tell about himself. This is something that he tells about himself. He's a right wing. He is very explicit about the fact that he doesn't think that the Israeli-Palestinian conflict can be resolved. I mean, if I just mentioned before that we need a leadership that will utilize the fact that there is a small majority in Israel that support ending the conflict, and will utilize this fact to increase the support and lead us towards ending the conflict. And Bennett says exactly the opposite. Okay. Now, if you ask me if Bennett is better than Netanyahu, the answer is big yes. Okay, Netanyahu lost it. And by the way, Bennett was relatively good prime minister. This is maybe one of the reasons that people are so excited about it. But if you look from the framework of the biggest challenge of Israel, and we saw in October 7th and since October 7th that this is the biggest challenge in Israel, Bennett promises to go in the direction of the right wing. And this direction brought us directly to October 7th.
So coming back to something that you were talking about a little bit earlier about understanding, trying to understand a little bit better as to what can be done to undermine the current coalition and bring about early elections. What does your data show? What's your, what has aChord learned?
Yeah, it's really a $1 million question. Really a $1 million question. There are so many efforts in Israel, as you sure know. I'm sure we are very concerned about what's going on in Israel, and also inside Israel we are extremely concerned. There was very serious effort since January 2023, when the judicial overhaul was announced by the government, just days after the government was in power, and since few months after October 7th, again a lot of effort. We know from research that what can be effective in driving people to the streets is anger, not hate, anger, and I believe that the fact that we go to struggle can affect and change the reality in Israel. That's why so many people went to the street to block the judicial overhaul. Hundreds of thousands of Israelis went to the street Saturday after Saturday, and they succeed to block the judicial overhaul. Right now, the situation is very challenging because people are in the street. Some of us are in the street for 5 years, and many of us are in the street for 2.5 years, since January 2023, include in this catastrophic time of the war. People are very tired, people are desperate, and mainly they don't succeed to see how the fact that they go to struggle will affect the current Israeli government, which really goes forward without paying into attention to the Israeli public. So it's very hard, we don't have like a remedy for that. I think that there should be the efforts inside Israel, which are still there, okay, to increase the struggle and protest against the government should continue, and they continue, and we from our side try to support them as much as possible. And as I said before, we need also pressure from outside.
So there's a lot of questions around, how can Jews from outside of Israel support alternative solutions? Which organizations, obviously, are other than New Israel Fund and the diaspora support? And I want to just twin that with another question coming in just about what messages land as well. So where Jews can put their support and support of other supportive communities as well, and what kind of messages as well should they be bringing?
So I'll try to partition between the support and the messages. I'll begin with the support. So there are many organizations in Israel that work to strengthen the liberal democratic camp, and of course, the support and the financial support for those organizations is very important. I'm not sure it's the right things for me now to mention like a list of organizations, but I can say that there are many good and important organizations that are working on the ground, either working in the street to try to create momentum for ending the war. Maybe I'll mention Standing Together, Omdim Beyachad, as a very prominent organization trying to raise, to bring and to increase the struggle against the war. and there are other organizations that work more vis-a-vis the mainstream in the Israeli public in order to mobilize it to struggle against the government and the war. And I think maybe NIF is a good entity to consult with if you want
Yes.
to about good organization in Israel. And the financial support is really very, very important. I have to mention, this camp is now under threat from the Israeli government. I mean, the Israeli government tries to do whatever it can to lower the struggle and to out the organizations that are working from the civil society to promote liberal democratic camp. And from the side of the messages, I think, and this is what I try to mention in my presentation. First, that and I can't repeat it enough times, that Israel lovers should put pressure to end the war, and putting pressure on the Israeli government to end the war is very pro-Israeli. The other thing I think is delegitimation for the Kahanist forces in the Israeli government. I think the decision of the UK government to do sanction against Smotrich and Ben Gvir is a pro-Israeli decision. Simply, I mean, politician that calls for genocide should be sanctioned. And if it is our politician, it is only, of course, it serves our interest that they will be sanctioned and hopefully also punished. So I think supporting your government, either the UK or people in the US, it's not the case.
Complicated, yes.
It's much more complicated, okay? But
yes,
putting pressure from outside now, it's an issue of life and death. Really, maybe here I'll take it back to the question of, what people in Israel, what parents think. So parents that send their kids to the army, they say, no, we don't see anything coming from the Israeli government. They want to continue the war forever. And they wish that Trump will come here and stop the war, okay? And an external government will come to stop the war, and also, by the way, to save the hostages. Many of the hostages' parents understand that the only way to save their kids and bring them from the cruelty of the Hamas back to Israel is by pressure of foreign government. So I think that the Jews outside of Israel, that a pro-Israeli act now is to put pressure on the Israeli government to end the war, to encourage your government to put strong pressure on the Israeli government that, and to join the majority, the small majority, but the existing majority in Israel that think that Israel should go to this direction of the regional framework, even one that includes the Palestinian state. And don't think that you are a minority. You are not a minority. The Israeli public is also there, at least to some, and not insignificant.
Thank you for that. And I want to just come back as well to this, to the conversation about which other organizations you can support. I think it's really important to say, and I didn't get a chance to do so at the opening of the session, but our work and our support of aChord is within a very vibrant NIF ecosystem, which is about building a vision of peace and security, about building democratic horizons. And within that are organizations like, have you seen the Horizon lately, that ran a huge campaign about opposing the war and opposing the government. Other organizations like Gerlitz Nelson and Mitvim, Think and Do tanks. And yes, it's that there's much to explore within the kind of NIF world and beyond that. Okay. Back to our questions here. I think there's a lot of questions about potential leaders who do accept democratic values, liberal values. Who are we looking at? We talked about Bennett and the problematic nature of his politics, but the opportunities potentially that can come with that. But more positively, who do you see out in the field who represents what we stand for?
Okay, so the most prominent leader that now represented is, of course, Yair Golan, the head of the new Democratic Party in Israel, which is the unification of the Labor and Meretz. Is very, very strong for liberal democratic values, for ending the war, and for going to a process to end the conflict. The other leader is Yair Lapid, who was for a short time the prime minister, the head of Yesh Atid. When we look at him, there is the picture is complicated. On the one hand, for sure, he's for ending the conflict, and he mentioned it many times. And a few months ago, a launch is planned for a resolution of the conflict. But on the other hand, he doesn't raise his flag. it doesn't raise this flag. It is not something strong. It is not at all something strong in his agenda. Okay, and of course it reflects something, and it also like send a message to the Israeli public. You know, he's the head of the opposition in Israel. He's the chairman of the opposition. And we have a big problem with Benny Gantz, you know, that lead the Machaneh HaMamlachti, and you know, he was against the sanction against Ben-Gvir and Smotrich. I think what it really, you know, it says everything. It says everything. He is not. I mean, from his point of view, he support peace. He even says it explicitly. Say that he support peace. But on the other hand, he doesn't like lead to this direction. So in the liberal democratic camp, we see like three leaders. One of them, Yair Golan, is very much for that. Yair Lapid is something in the middle, and we have a big challenge with Gantz. I do want to say that it is very important to pay attention to the leadership of the Arab parties in Israel. Okay, the Arab parties, the Arab public in Israel, and its political representative are for sure for ending the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. You know, I could speak by length about the situation of the Arab citizens, but just think about the fact that their country, their state, is in a war against their people. Okay, the people from their people are being killed by their country, by their country, by their state on a daily basis. It's a very difficult situation. The political leadership are for against the conflict, and there is a big question: will the leaders of the Jewish liberal democratic camp will be able again to join forces with at least one Arab party to create a government that will replace Netanyahu? I want to remind you that in the recent 16 years, the only time that Netanyahu was not a prime minister was because there was a coalition that included an Arab party, and it is another big challenge that is facing the Israeli liberal democratic camp.
Okay, thank you very much. And just reminding everybody that there is no support for any particular political party or political runners and leaders as part of NIF's work in a charitable status. We're coming towards the end of our webinar, and I wonder whether there's anything that you feel that you would like to address that hasn't come up in our Q&As at this point.
I think that I didn't speak, maybe just mention the fact that what Israel does in Gaza in the recent year, months and weeks, it's really arrived to a level that many of us in Israel, include me, never believe that it will happen, it will be done by Israel. Needless to say that I represent a camp that is 100% for returning the hostages and think all the bad news that you can think about the Hamas, about the October 7th attack, and about the fact that the hostages are still there. But we've reached a point of time that Israel is conducting, I would say, at least extremely terrible things in Gaza. We have friends that serve there, and we know we don't need any pro-Palestinian protest in DC or in New York to know that in too many cases civilians are being killed in Gaza, and in too many cases it is not unintentionally, and this is a very problematic point of Israel in these days. And the only way to save Israel from the current path is really to bring earlier election, change the government, and to go to the direction that we spoke about. I think that we all should do a very, very serious effort. From organizational point of view, I'm very, very happy and proud that aChord is supporting many players that work in this direction.
Thank you, Ron. That was really fascinating. I just want to thank you for your dedication to this work and to promoting our visions of peace and security, whether it's here at aChord or also in your work at Sikori and beyond. It was really wonderful to have you all of you together with us today. It was hundreds and hundreds of people joining us for our webinar from across the world. And we look forward to continuing this journey and turning our values into action in the coming days, months, and years. I want to thank you.
Thank you very much, Erev Tov.